aside from theory of constraints, are there any other primary models or theories that you use for making decisions, simplifying processes? What I would say is creating exponential growth.
So I think probably the other one, there's a couple of frameworks that I use, but the framework from Nassim Taleb about anti-fragility.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I think that is massively important, is to think about systems, classifying them based on their stress response, and doing the same with people, right? As you can learn a lot about a person or about a company based on how they respond to positive or negative stress. If they are harmed more by a negative stress than benefit from an equivalent positive stress, they're fragile. If they are not much harmed by a negative stress, they don't gain much from a positive stress. Like some of our recent customers we're working on is these high fashion brands like Ralph Lauren and Tommy Hilfiger, etc. You know, up, down, these guys sell consistently. They sell a little bit less during a depression, sell a little bit more during a boom, but they're pretty robust. Anti-fragile is the one where you have figured out a way of limiting the pain of a negative stress, but you also have put in mechanisms to fully capitalize on the benefit of a positive stress. And I think if you apply that also to relationships, right? Relationships are inherently fragile because we suffer much more from negative stresses than what we benefit from positive stresses.
Will you define, in this case, positive stress?
So positive stress would be something that goes well, better than expected, right? So in a business, it would be we ended up selling more than what we forecasted, or our suppliers were more reliable than what we expected. In a personal relationship, the same thing, right? As my partner is going kind of out of their way to make me feel special and safe. That's a positive stress. They're giving me ongoing support and encouraging me to do my business. They generating energy. They trusting me more than probably what they should. They're giving me more attention. These are all positive stresses that are unexpected. How do I capitalize on them?
So what do you find are the things that people mistake when it comes to capitalizing positive stress? It seems like people, they don't squeeze the juice out of it. What are the reasons for that?
You probably know even better than I do, but I think the protection mechanisms that we build to limit the damage of a negative stress, unfortunately, is also applied to positive stresses. And as a result, we almost never capitalize on them. You know, it's like if I imagine, you know, we're partners and I go, wow, you know, Ben, you look amazing today. And you go, what do you want?
So we just immediately downplay a compliment.
Yeah, it just kills it, right? It just absolutely kills it. Because we all need energy and motivation and support. So you could have said, you know what, Alan, I really needed it, man. I'm having a bad day. And you complimenting me, you know, it's like, thank you so much. You know, that really was helpful. But the protection mechanism that's based on a fundamental assumption that people are nice when they want to get something from me, it causes you to respond to a positive stress as if it's a negative stress.
Is there any other big ones that come to your mind on not capitalizing on positive stress?
So if you imagine you're a person that stop trusting your partner. And as a result of that, the protection mechanism is that you constantly searching to find evidence of why you shouldn't be trusting them. So you go into their computer when they're sleeping and you're going through all their emails and their photos and private messages, etc. Right? Now, one or two things can happen. The first one is you don't find anything. Now, what should be your response be to this evidence?
Positive.
Oh, absolutely right. I mean, I checked everywhere and there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. This means I should be trusting this person more because I really didn't know that I was going to check in and I know that they, you know, whatever. Versus saying, I didn't find anything. They've become so good at hiding stuff. I find something that is really innocent, but I blow it up, right? Oh, they've taken a screenshot of this guy with his shirt off, you know, that's evidence that, you know, she's interested in other men or vice versa, right? Rather than, you know, honey, I couldn't help myself, went through your stuff. I'm so sorry. I feel embarrassed. I found this, like, what is this? They say, it was a weight loss program. I thought the guy looked amazing, you know, so I can remember it, right? And then accepting that evidence compared to, there he goes again, or there she goes again. She clearly, you know, took that for different reasons. Because of our protection mechanisms, it's literally the inability to see evidence that contradict our worst fears. And almost always assigning the worst possible meaning to events.
How do you fix it when you've already done this a lot.
It's really, really hard. Really hard. I mean, you have to try. That's the first thing, right? Constantly ask yourself, are there other reasons that this could have happened? What would be evidence?
If you have blown up, if you've taken a molehill and turned it into a mountain, though,
Yeah.
like, is the best thing to do is just to simply apologize?
I mean, that would be it. But remember, your mind is constantly trying to protect you, right? And in that moment, you don't see any reason to apologize. You cannot distinguish between fear and fact. Your mind simply doesn't support you with that. It's treating all your fears as if they are absolute facts.
And you're saying that these are the things that turn relationships into more fragile.
Much more fragile. They're really hard to fix.
And most people deal with these.
Most people deal with them. Obviously, to very...
Most people are on the fragile side of things.
Yeah.
So you say theory of constraints and then anti-fragility are your two core frameworks for decision-making and accelerated growth.
Yeah, it's a little bit wider than... So a non-traditional application of theory of constraints would be to say, okay, so we have a scarce resource. And knowing this scarce resource is really important because it helps me to set goals that are ambitious but achievable, helps me to decide what to focus on, helps me to decide what the impact is on the system, what rules to use, when to change the rules. Like if I say that one of our constraints, our scarcest resources is attention, right? Immediately, as soon as I say that, there's the two elements of theory of constraints that pop up that says if you have a constraint, make sure you don't waste it. Stop doing all the things that waste that scarce resource.
Are you calling the constraint the scarce resource?
Yes.
Is the constraint always the core resource?
It's a resource that I don't have enough of to achieve a goal. Or if I had more of it, I could achieve more of that goal. So if you take attention, right? So there could be two circumstances where attention is a constraint. The one is the number of things that demand my attention on a daily basis exceeds my available attention. So if I consider work, relationship, health, all of that stuff, all the things that demand my attention should get my attention every day. If that exceeds my available attention, then attention is my constraint. But
so is that the actual definition of the constraint? Is it like the core resource which you have not enough of to achieve the goal?
Yeah, but again, something that's not that obvious when you study kind of theory of constraints superficially, for lack of a better word, is that when Ellie defined the 5 focusing steps of theory of constraints, which is the core element, right? It's a process of ongoing improvement. He said, step 0 is you have a goal. You define the goal. That will tell you what resources you need and how much of them. It will tell you what work you have to do to achieve the goal, right? Are you going to provide products or services or what is it, right, to make your impact or income? And any resource that you don't have enough of to achieve that goal that you've committed to is a constraint. So what are the resources? I don't have enough market for my product or service. I don't have enough capacity to reliably deliver it in the time that people expect. I don't have enough supply, some raw material or component or skill that's external to me. I don't have enough cash, or I don't have enough attention. You know, as a business owner, as management levels, those are, and you can imagine when Goldratt defined the first step, he said, identify the system constraints, and he put an S in brackets. And what he said was that having a single constraint is an exception.
But is it good to isolate the 20% versus the 80% of constraints?
There's always
the constraints that have the highest upside, kind of using Gary Keller's question, what's the one thing that if solved makes everything else irrelevant? Like could you find the highest lever constraint, which actually ends up solving the others?
That works in stable systems. In a chaotic system where there are constraints that are feeding each other, you can't improve a system like that. What you have to do is you have to get it out of chaos first. You have to lower your commitment. You have to stop doing stuff that's just adding whoop and stuff like that. So that's where the kind of the counterintuitive part. Imagine you've committed to a 10x goal, right? And I say to you, Ben, do you have enough demand to achieve that 10x growth? And you say, not really at the moment. You know, we're working on developing irresistible offers, etc. I said, okay, if you get to the demand tomorrow, do you have actually enough capacity to deliver it? And you go, no. And he said, do you have enough supply? Do you have enough cash? Do you have enough attention? You go, no, no, no. You are absolutely in chaos.
What do you define by the difference between a chaotic versus a stable system?
So the number of constraints in a system and their dependency is a useful way of defining.
So if there's a lot of constraints and they're all dependent on each other, that's chaos.
No. So simple system, one constraint. Only one resource that I don't have enough of to meet the demand, right? Complex system, multiple constraints, but they don't interact.
Did you say that's chaos?
That's complexity.
Oh yeah, complex. Yeah.
Right? It's like degrees of freedom. The first system has 1 degree of freedom. It's that one problem. If I solve that, everything gets better. Now I have 4 constraints, but they are not interdependent. It's like 4 different business units that are not coupled in any way, right? Last one is I have more than one, but they interact with each other. And that's
the chaos.
That's a chaotic system, yeah.
The goal to always, so for example, you with this business, and you mentioned it's very complex. You use the word complex, maybe it's chaotic, but with the business you're working on, is the goal always to create a single system, which then you can isolate and focus on the core constraint and really drive insane growth? Is that always the goal?
That's always the goal.
Do you care if I share with you my complex and maybe even my chaotic? After you share anything, I want to share with you my either chaos or complex situation and see if you could help me simplify it. By the way, I love that model.
Yeah.
Are those, I mean, I've heard those 3 steps before, but would you say that those 3, chaos, complex, and simple, would you say those, I mean, I've heard those in tons of different contexts, but would you say are those 3 a core process of theory of constraints, or there's something else?
They are part of the additional body of knowledge that I've developed.
Okay. I've heard those 3 models though, in different contexts.
Not using theory of constraints, but there's this basic principle in science and mathematics that a system's complexity is defined by its degrees of freedom. And Ellie used to give this example to people. I don't know if you've seen any of his presentations. What he would do is he would say, system A looks like this. That's system A. System B looks like this. And then he would draw kind of arrows, right? Connecting everything. And he would ask people, which of these 2 systems, A or B, is the simplest? And people would say...
People would obviously assume A, but they don't have the whole story of A, right?
Right, because we think about complexity as how long will it take us to describe the system, right? Oh, there's 4 parts in system A. That's simple. When I look at system B, it looks like spaghetti, right? There's more parts than 4. There's interconnections between all of them. I don't know how they interact with each other, etc. He said when you show a scientist the same picture, the guy is almost like as confused as the first one. Like, why are you asking me? Clearly B is the simplest. Why?
Clearly B is the simplest?
Yeah, because there's only 1 degree of freedom. If these arrows indicate cause and effect, right, it means that touching this one point changes the whole system. That's very simple. I have only 1 degree of freedom. Yeah, I have 4 degrees of freedom. So there's...
And will you redefine, because I remember taking a lot of stats classes, will you redefine for me degree of freedom?
So it's a number of things that independently I would need to touch to change the state of the system.
And those are the core levers?
Those are the core levers, right? So if you go back to my definition, is to say, I've got this system here that looks like this, and this represents the overall flow. This could be like a complete, supply chain, like the one that we're dealing with, where they own everything from the mine to the end retailer. That's my constraint, right? They just don't have enough costing capacity. Okay, that's a simple system, 1 degree of freedom. Now I say, oh, by the way, they also have a different business that's unrelated to steel that looks like this, and there the constraint is there. I say, okay, they've got 2 constraints, but they're independent. That's a complex system. I now have 2 degrees of freedom. So if I want to grow the business, I'll have to touch both of them to keep on growing. And then suddenly I go, they have a system that looks like this. There's 2 constraints. If C1 has a good day, it just floods C2 and C2 can't cope. If C2 has a good day, it pulls all the stuff and C1 can't cope. So the constraint is moving all the time. Now I've got a chaotic system.
Oh, my goodness. And so the objective, so it is going from chaos to complex to simple. Is it about removing constraints? Is it about altering the system so various constraints no longer exist? Because your goal is to get down to one constraint. And so is the objective to shift things so that various things stop being constraints? You're essentially trying to eliminate constraints?
Yes.
And you're essentially finding the core constraints to remove?
Yes, but in a way that makes things flow. So when I look at capacity profiles, right, there's a sort of inherent V profile that says, here's the capability of my constraint that can do 10. For the system to be able to do 10, I need protective capacity upstream and downstream. So this might need 12, this might need 11, etc. And it's figuring out what that profile is, so stuff that flows. So the work, whether I'm doing a production or projects, is never waiting substantially for a resource. The work as I'm doing it is just flowing through the system. And you basically have 3 profiles. You have this one where the constraint is somewhere in the middle. You have another profile that basically looks like this, that says the constraint is right at the front of the process. And you have another one that looks like this, which says the constraint is right at the end. It's basically we're treating the customer as our constraint. And the whole system has been designed to make sure that those customers never wait too long. Like a restaurant business like McDonald's is a good example of that. Their whole business model is treating the number of customers walking into their restaurant as the constraint, and everything else is subordinated to that. They want to make sure that the queue of customers waiting is never so long that the customer starts leaving. As soon as they notice the queue starts growing, they start adding capacity upstream at the cash tiller, at the, whatever it is. So if you think about last observation, imagine you have an entrepreneur, right? And this entrepreneur has become really good at retail, and they have to decide how to expand their business. They want to do 10x. And you say, well, you have essentially 2 options. You can say, well, you've become really good at retail. You currently retail camping equipment. Why don't you just go and buy other retailers that are similar, right? So you have camping equipment, you now have sports goods, you go and buy 3 other retailers, and that will help you to get to your 10x goal, right? But now essentially what you've got is you've got 4 independent businesses, 4 different constraints. The only thing that they have in common is that they are retailers. So every time you want to improve your system, you basically have to touch 4 points. Compared to saying, well, I own the camping equipment, right? Why don't I go and buy the logistics company that delivers the stuff, the distributor that supplies the transportation company, and a manufacturer that makes it? So in that way, every time I can figure out a way to sell more camping equipment, my transport business can go up, my distribution business can go up, my manufacturing business will go up. And that becomes my focus, is just find a way to get more customers walking into my retail, physical brick and mortar or online store to buy more. And I'm constantly checking that I have enough capacity in my transportation, distribution, and manufacturing so I can always reliably meet the commitment. That's a completely different way of getting to 10x, but it's keeping it simple in that the primary focus is on 2 things. Is where's the constraint and how do I make sure that that constraint is never starved or blocked or neglected? Make sure I have enough resources upstream or downstream from it.
If I could, I would love to present my complex situation and have you break it down and see if you could simplify it. But I also did have a question about probabilities, because something you said, I've been thinking a lot about probability and prediction lately, concept of probability and also prediction. And, you've heard that they say that the brain is a prediction machine.
Yes.
And my question is it a prediction machine based on probabilities? Or is it just, it's predicting what's coming next based on memory, based on input, and it's just essentially providing its best prediction? That's a little different than probability, right?
I've heard you say that, and I've heard other people say that, and it's made me think a lot about it, because, it's like I was watching a documentary last night where they found these cases of people becoming instant savants, right? A guy that was, he was at a club, he walked outside, somebody ran up and he smashed him on the back of his head. He fell over, bumped his head badly, got concussion. And then he woke up as a savant, right? With this incredible mathematical capabilities. He saw patterns everywhere, could write long, and he never cared for mathematics. So there's this suspicion that we have all these capabilities, and they get activated or deactivated because we have limited energy and bandwidth. So, as soon as you allocate too much to mathematics, you lose some social skills. Social skills requires a lot of our bandwidth, etc. So to me, it's, if I'm making a decision, my brain is trying to predict what will happen if I do it, what will happen if I don't do it. Best case, worst case, etc. There's a whole bunch. I'm not sure to what extent we're considering detailed probabilities. It's like, is there a difference between a 10% probability of me getting a side effect if I struck, or 20%? Will that change my mind? So I know there's kind of limits in which it makes no difference, and then there's a point where it makes a difference. So if somebody says to you, listen, Ben, if you take this drug, there is a chance that it could kill you, but it's 1 in a million. Would that make a difference to 1 in 10 million, or 1 in a billion, or 1 in 10,000, or 1 in 1,000, or 1 in 100? So there's some kind of probability that we assign to it, but I suspect that we are probably much more considering how we will feel than what the outcome is going to be from a probability perspective.
So when it comes to us generating probabilities in the future, we're generally thinking about emotional outcomes versus technical outcomes or something like that?
I think that the emotional one tends to weigh higher than the other one.
And also maybe the emotional outcome of not getting it. And yes, what that might mean to your ego or something like that, right?
We have all these biases that influence our decision making.
How would you in the future mitigate that risk for yourself and for them so that you could land that kind of using Chris Voss's framework, that it's not, that the failure is not about not getting the deal, it's about taking a long time to not get a deal?
Yeah. I think it's, if I'm clear, and we just tried it with another proposal, and it immediately I could see it made a difference, is to say, listen, one of the common challenges for making decisions is when we confuse variability and uncertainty. So when we are predicting an outcome of 3 to 10%, what you should be doing is to check if the worst case benefit, the 3%, is still going to be an order of magnitude more than the worst case cost. That makes it a really simple decision. So those are the only, of all the things that you have to guess, those are the only things that actually matters, is what's in your mind is the worst case benefit and what in your mind would be the worst case cost.
Do you care if I present to you a broad context of my life and get your opinion, seeing how you would look at taking either chaos or complex and making it simple? So I'm going to try to give you not too many data points, but the data points that I find are relevant. 10x is easier than 2x is going very well. It's already opened up lots of, call it 50K, either keynotes or even just one-day leadership trainings that I do. I'm even doing some really interesting leadership trainings with companies that are like doing over 100 million a year and want to be doing $1 billion a year, and just kind of applying some of the core frameworks, not just from that book, but a few other frameworks that I've developed. My goal would be, and maybe here's the problem is maybe I have too many goals, and those too many goals may be two. One goal I have would be to sell 10 million copies of my books. The other goal would be to 10x my net worth. Both of those I would like to actually try to accomplish in 3 years. And I actually think that by selling 10 million books in the right way, I could easily 10x my net worth, which I actually think I'm quite positioned to do with the right situations and opportunities. It wouldn't be that hard with, call it, the right collaborations or partnerships or situations.
Just for you as a framework, right? So there's always a single goal, and then there's necessary conditions. So what you've already done in this few minutes is you've communicated to me that the real goal is the net worth increase, and that the most simplest, best way of getting there will be to do it by 10 million books. That's already your core assumption. They are not two independent goals. They are related to each other. They could give you different benefits, right? The one shows you I've made a 10 million impact because 10 million people have read my books. Fundamentally, the way that you explained it is that by selling 10 million books, I'll get to 10x my net worth.
Yeah, I actually think I could get to a lot more than that with 10 million. But I will say it's challenging because as an author and as someone who cares more about impact than money, the 10 million books is more compelling. But at the end of the day, 10 million books is actually a lot harder than 10xing the net worth. 10 million books is very difficult. 10 million books may be a vanity metric. Maybe I should just let it go. I plan on writing books and doing projects for the rest of my life. But if I was at that level, call the next 2 to 3 years, like I would feel very confident that I could fully direct my attention towards the other things for the rest of my life if I wanted to. So are the necessary conditions, the necessary conditions to maintaining or achieving or maximizing the true goal?
Yeah, it's like your health.
Would you say that the necessary conditions are the core bottlenecks?
Yeah, I would say is if you view it as something I don't have enough of, but it could also be something I'm now spending too much time. So if you think about your health, right? There's a level of good enough health. There's a level where it becomes an obsession. And now it's hurting your ability to spend enough time with your family, make enough impact on the world. So it follows that inverse U-shape. So that can't be the goal unless you're an Olympic athlete. And I say, like, how much faster you want to swim? Like, I have a friend of mine that's an Olympic swimmer, right? It's like, there's never enough. I want to go more and more and more. That's my goal for now. Once I retire, that goal will become a necessary condition to maintain my health at a level where I can function properly and make the kind of impact in the world, introduce swimming to as many kids as I can, do charity work, etc.
So do you think it's a crucial aspect of maximizing the true goals? The true goal meaning that it's something that is an infinite game. Let's call it the infinite game, yes. Where it's like it's something that is pure values and purpose based and something like that, and is the objective then to clarify all the core necessary conditions?
Yeah, and not confuse them with a goal, and to be very much aware of the level of good enough and what is too little and what is too much.
Have you heard of the concept of minimum effective dose? Minimum effective dose being like, so for example, they talk about boiling water and about how minimum effective dose is 212 degrees, but anything above that's wasteful. So clarifying what is the minimum requirement for this to be. And so, like, rather than going for the 20 million in this case, you'd actually shoot more for the 10 million, right?
Absolutely.
You'd shoot for the minimum effective dose.
Yes. For each of the necessary conditions, find that minimum effective dose, that level of good enough. But be aware what is too little and be aware what is too much. And when you catch yourself in one of those zones, that necessary condition needs your attention. As long as it's in a level of good enough, it doesn't require your attention.
So what is your take on putting deadlines on these things? For example, like, I would love to say hit that minimum effective dose in the next 2-3 years. I could probably even do it faster if I went for just a minimum effective dose versus the maximum effective dose, maybe on the higher, like on a 10x level, right? Maybe I don't need 40 million like you're saying. Maybe that's now turning the means into the end, right? And now going too overboard. But what are your thoughts on putting deadlines on these things and having that be a constraint that changes the strategy?
Yeah, I think it's almost a requirement because it forces you to challenge assumptions, right? That's coming back to kind of my idea of it's impossible unless. It's like you say, okay, so you've got this goal of hitting, 10x within 3 years. What if you made that 2 years? Will that change the way that you're thinking about it? What if you made it 1 year? What if you made it 3 months? And maybe by shortening that, it comes up with a new way that you previously would have ignored that could be much, much faster and better and simpler. So I think playing around with the time helps you to find these innovative ways of getting to it as quickly as possible.
So in my case, do you think that I should throw away the book number goal then?
I think it's a useful thing if it inspires you, if it drives you, if it gets you off your butt in the morning, yes, it's.
I also know that it's a correlate. Like, for example, I know that if I'm selling more of my books, I'm likely to get more opportunities to make money, for example.
And it helps you to think out of the box, etc. Because 10 million is a big, big number. There are very, very few authors that ever reach that. Where it becomes problematic is when it creates an expectation gap, and that starts causing stress and anxiety. That says, I had the same bloody goal 5 years ago. The best I ever got to was like 500,000 copies, which is a huge amount of books. But now it's starting to cause stress and anxiety, and now it's not.
So you got to ask: is this goal becoming a liability versus an asset? Is it hurting me?
Is it? And that to me is goals and assumptions. What I've realized, one of my biggest insights in my life was goals and assumptions and beliefs are not right and wrong. They're helpful or harmful. Is this goal helping you or is it harming you? Who the hell knows if it's right to have an expectation of 10 million or 20? I don't know, but is it helping you?
And the only way you would know if it's helping is if it's helping you ultimately achieve the true goal. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, and it's like allowing you to stay within those minimum effective dosages, those levels of good enough, the Goldilocks zones, right?
Let me give you a few scenarios then. So if I was to look at my true goal, and I come from more of a religious background, and then one thing you said to me as well, which on the anti-fragile side, which concerns me, and I can see myself on the negative extremes in both cases where I'm not maximizing unique situations. I want to present to you one other concept and get your opinion on. So I came up with a framework I call Keystone goal.
Okay.
And so you know what the keystone is in an arch? So in an arch, a keystone is the center stone that holds the arch up. So like there's an arch. You know what I'm talking about when I say arch?
Yes.
Yeah, there's an arch, and the keystone is the center stone that holds it up. And if you knock out the keystone, the whole arch collapses. And so the keystone's what holds it together. In the book, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, he talks about keystone habits, and he says he basically aligns it with the idea of saying that there's one habit that often can ripple and create other great habits. So for example, if someone's out of shape and stuff like that, and they've got terrible finances, that maybe one habit then creates a ripple or a cascading effect, which ends up creating like changing all the habits essentially. So like a person starts walking 10,000 steps a day, right? But then all of a sudden, because of that, they stop consuming junk media. They actually start consuming better media, right? Then they also like start simultaneously like improving. So that's one example. But I actually talk about the idea not of keystone habit, but of a keystone goal. And the reason I ask this is maybe I've been making the necessary condition into the keystone goal versus the true goal. So as an example, so like the keystone goal, as I see it, is it's the one goal that if achieved, actually solves everything else you're trying to accomplish. So it's by solving one thing that you solve all things that are the other things that you want to achieve. So as an example, when I was a first-year PhD student, my keystone goal, as I would describe it, was not actually to get the PhD, it was to get a six-figure book deal. I was a brand new foster parent, and so the six-figure book deal solved the financial situation for my family. The book deal solved a lot of challenges. One is me doing the work I wanted, writing books. It also allowed me to have more time flexibility. I stopped doing, I would no longer, I'd have enough income and be focused on the work I have to control my schedule, but I'd be doing the work I wanted in a professional manner and be able to provide for my family, doing the things that I love and want to do. And so that one goal, and then the deliberate practice towards it would help me become the kind of person I want to be. But also once I achieved it, I would now have the context of freedom that I wanted. And so for me, it's been helpful to decide the single target, which sort of aligns all my core interests, and essentially by knocking out the one thing, I've actually solved them all, or organized my life around them all. But I've wondered now that you've given me the idea of necessary, and I've heard of these things, but thinking about it, like I've often, I think, made the necessary condition into the keystone goal.
I really like that concept. I had an example last night. I was on a coaching call with a friend of mine, and he's lost a dramatic amount of weight. We presented together a paper on, low carb and all the mistakes that people make in making nutritional decisions. And he really suffered because he couldn't reconcile the inconsistency between him knowing and him not acting. And it was killing him inside. I could see it, right? He knows it's bad, and yet he does it, right? He can't help himself getting that scoop of ice cream at the end of every meal and snacking, etc. Everything's changed. So I said to him, what happened? He said, Alan, you won't believe it. I met this woman online, this is a scientist that's developed this simple app that gives you feedback. And I said, okay, what do you need? She says, I just need you to take your blood sugar every morning at 7 o'clock and send it to me. I said, what happened? He said, everything changed. The fact that I know that somebody else is looking at my sugar level every morning at 7 o'clock, and I didn't want to embarrass myself, not sending it to her or sending it to her and it's really high, it changed everything. I mean, he used to struggle walking half a mile. He now walks 5 to 7 miles a day because he knows it helps him. He says he never eats anything after 8 o'clock. He stops eating carbs after 3 o'clock, because everything's tied to this one thing that when I'm sending that data point tomorrow, I don't want to be embarrassed. I want to be proud. I want to make her proud. And it's like, holy, that's a keystone habit that he's picked up, and it's helped him achieve this keystone goal of his to satisfy a necessary condition that his health is now in order. When a necessary condition is at the level of not enough, it has to get our full attention to fix it. It doesn't make it the goal, but I think it's what you've shown us. It's like you have to address it. It's called a necessary condition for a reason, right? It's necessary. to achieve the goal. It's not sufficient, but it's necessary. If you don't have it, if you compromise on it, there's no way that you can achieve your goal. If there are one of these necessary conditions that's not in place at the moment, you have to address it.
Would you say that those necessary conditions are the core bottlenecks right now?
I wouldn't call them bottlenecks because we have such a precise definition of a constraint or bottleneck. Is a resource that I don't have enough of.
Yeah. So, but these necessary conditions, well, but if they're necessary conditions that you have not yet solved, then wouldn't you call them?
No, so what I would call this, imagine you have this triangle, if we keep it very simple, health, wealth, and happiness, right? So say your goal is happiness, right? And the necessary conditions is health and wealth, right? What is in common between all three of these elements is that they all require your scarcest resource, which is your limited attention and trust and energy. Those are three resources that we have to allocate every single day to make progress on anything that's important to us. We have to give something our attention or someone our attention. We have to give something or someone our trust. And we have to give someone or something our energy, our motivation. So if I don't have enough of one of those, immediately I can't satisfy my necessary conditions and won't be able to achieve my goal. Why I'm not able to do it is because I'm wasting my attention, or I'm wasting my trust, or I'm wasting my energy. So that's the way I view a constraint as a resource I need to achieve a necessary condition, rather than it being the necessary condition, if that makes sense.
So wait, the constraint is the what to achieve the necessary condition?
It's a resource that I need, a critical but scarce resource that I need to achieve it. Like I could have a resource like knowledge, but is scarcity of knowledge ever the reason I'm not achieving my goal? If I say no, it's still a resource, I need it, but it's abundant. I can instantly get it when I need. I ask ChatGPT, it's never holding me back, right? So to get more is really easy, but to get more attention, to get more trust, to get more energy, drive, motivation, those things are hard. And that's what they're not only scarce, but they're hard to get more. And I like to also think of applying the criterion. I don't want to get into too deep, but they all have an asymmetrical response. Very easy to lose attention, very hard to gain attention. Very easy to lose trust, very hard to gain it.
Dory, would you say those are the three ultimate factors? Is attention, trust, and energy? Those are the three most profound levers and constraints, period, of life, right?
Absolutely.
I think you're dead right about that. I mean, as I was just thinking about that, yeah, easy to lose, hard to gain. I mean, those are honestly the biggest constraints, right? And those are the biggest levers of upside too, right? You know, one thing you actually triggered me to think about was when it's thinking about great opportunities that you're not squeezing the juice out of.
Yeah,
I consider some of those maybe a keystone opportunity. That by that is what I say. But what I mean by keystone opportunity is this is a unique situation that actually, if you maximize, the upside is so high, it's going to ultimately help you make insane strides on your true goal. But it's also something, given it's a keystone opportunity, it's a really high end one. Given anti-fragile, you're likely underperforming it and making it fragile rather than anti-fragile. And it's making me look at my life and say, there are likely a few keystone opportunities that could help me either achieve those necessary conditions or dramatically advance my true goal that I'm not maximizing, either not putting my attention on, not increasing the trust, or not putting the energy into, because I'm too diverted trying to do something else.
And it's also, I don't know if you've written much about it or thought much about it, but one other thing that I think relates to this discussion is whether you should strive to have a balanced life compared to a life that's in harmony. A balanced life is almost saying that I have these limited resources like attention, and I need to allocate it equally to the various aspects of my life, compared to saying I want all the aspects of my life to be in harmony, all pointing to supporting my true goal. And that might mean very asymmetrical allocations of my scarcest resources.
Yeah, I think balance, period, is kind of the faulty assumption that you give equal weights to all of your priorities, right?
Yeah.
Or even equal time, right? Yep. Whereas I like the idea of harmony, that these things are synergistically working in alignment towards the same true goal in different times and seasons, get different weights of attention and energy, right?
Exactly.
As long as one is not dramatically decreasing, that's the harmony side, right? There's also there's a theory on this, which you would like. It's on passion. And basically passion is broken into two core categories. You might look up the researcher. His last name is Vallant, V-A-L-L, I think A-N-T. He's the core researcher on passion. He has what you would call harmonious passion. And then he has what's called, I think, obsessive passion. And obsessive are where you, where this thing now kind of owns you, you don't own it. And it's now taking away from the other crucial areas of your life because you're obsessing on it so much that like literally it's hurting your health or it's hurting your relationships. And so harmonious being the opposite, if you control it, it doesn't control you. And that by engaging in it, it actually advances the other crucial aspects of your life.
I like that. I think you can apply it to all of those, right? So if I use motivation as a synonym for passion, right? And attention and trust, it could be harmonious or it could be obsessive. It's like when I'm giving something too much of my attention and starting to take away my attention from some of the other necessary conditions, it becomes obsessive. It's no longer harmonious. I'm going down the level of good enough is. One of the questions that fear of constraints poses when you have a scarce resource, right? Like trust or attention or motivation.
Or even an opportunity. Every opportunity itself is a scarce resource because we don't know how long it's going to be around.
The way that you verbalize it to me, what's interesting is that I want to increase the trust or versus capitalize on the trust that I already have. Are you fully exploiting what you have versus elevating it? So exploiting, use what you have better. Elevating means getting more of it. It's you don't have enough, you need more.
Usually you would get more by exploiting what you have, right?
Right. Versus elevating, which is I need to increase the level of trust versus saying, no, am I fully capitalizing on the trust that I already have with them?
I know I'm not.
Which is very different to trying to get more trust.
Getting more trust is usually indirect to capitalizing on the trust you already have, right?
Yeah, that could trigger a virtuous cycle, right? If somebody sees that the level of trust they've given you, you are fully utilizing, they will tend to give you more. You know, that says sometimes you're going to have to, you've heard people say, take imperfect action, you know, take uncomfortable action, maybe even take an action that it turns out wasn't the right action specifically. But wow, what was the value of doing it that showed my full commitment to this goal, to myself and to the rest of the world? Just to give you a brief insight, is the reason why I develop all these digital twins is because they have a SaaS basis to them. So when I have enough of those clients, that's when I can stand back and focus on my true goal, which is to make as much as possible an impact in helping people make better, faster decisions when it really, really matters. That's my ultimate goal.
You are so good at it. I hope that you can continue. I mean, I know you will, but yeah. Well, let's talk soon. I love your true goal. It's very aligned, very interesting. This conversation has been brilliant, Idris, and thank you.
And I mean, just another insight for you. The reason why I built the app, right, is two reasons. One is it makes it easier to follow the process. And we're going to keep on trying to make the app simpler, faster, easier to use. But the other thing is that it helps me to measure if I'm actually achieving my goal, right? I can sell a book and I don't know if somebody ever read it. I can see using my app. I can see how many decisions they've made using my app. I can see if they've completed all 5 steps or they got stuck at step 1 or 2. So to me, it's a massive necessary condition. It's a reason why I keep on pouring money into it, even though there's at the moment no return, because it's just a practical way for me to track whether I'm achieving my goal or not, even if it's costing me tens of thousands of dollars a month.
Hopefully at some point it can become profitable as well.
You know, that leverage with one in 1,000 apps are profitable. I don't know if you know that. 1 in 1,000. But that doesn't mean that 1 in 1,000 helps the person that created the app to achieve their goal. That's
I agree.
Right?
I couldn't agree more.
It's not about if it's profitable or not. Is it helping me achieve my goal? So you can imagine if 20,000 people have downloaded your app, you look at the data, and of the 20,000, 19,000 of them only used it once, compared to 19,000 of them use it almost on a daily basis. Wow. Where the hell else can I get such direct feedback about whether the actions I'm taking is actually helping or hurting my goal? I don't know of any other way. So that's for me is like your house decision, right? If I look at that decision and I go, listen, I could have, I've put in probably $1 million into my apps, right? That I could have used for something else. I could have made an investment and be very comfortable now from a net worth perspective. But when I look back at that decision, it says, Alan, if you had to explain that to anybody, all I need to do is that shows me my full commitment to my goal. You want to know how serious I am about my goal? That's how serious I am.
And that's the most important thing, right?
Absolutely.
Level of commitment to the goal.
Yeah.
That's the most important. And by the way, I would define that as identity. Identity is what you're most committed to as a person.